This is the gospel according to the IRS, Breaking Points and Church Financial Updates. And now, here's the authority, Dr. Michael Chitwood and Breaking Points.
Welcome to Breaking Points. I'm Michael Chitwood. Today we're going to be talking about probably one of the most misunderstood things that deal with church compliance. First question is you always must remember that what you don't know can hurt you. Now, as a church bookkeeper or treasurer or administrator, elder, deacon, you have fiduciary responsibilities. I want to talk to you about something today that is very important. So I want you to grab a pad and a pen right now. We're going to begin this 5-minute Breaking Point session because this is truly a Breaking Point news story today. I want to talk to you about the word sacerdotal. S-A-C-E-R-D-O-T-A-L. Sacerdotal. That's a very important word, and just in case you don't know that word, it's something that you better make yourself familiar with in order to have your house of worship in order. Today, there are 9 sacerdotal duties that make up the qualification, or what we would call the credentials, of a person that's going to be receiving a tax-free housing allowance under the Internal Revenue Code, Section 107. I'd like to list those 9 sacerdotal duties for you at this time. So you got pen and pad ready? Let's take a note. Number 1, baptisms. Baptisms would be number 1. Number 2 would be weddings. Number 2 is weddings. Number 3 would be funerals. Funerals. Number 4 would be communion, or what a lot of people refer to as Holy Eucharist. Number 5 would be teaching. Teaching of the Word of God, of course. Teaching anything that pertains to the Word of God. Number 6 would be administration of church affairs. Anybody that's involved with the administration of the church affairs. Number 7 would be spiritual guidance. Remember, you can't use that word counseling anymore there unless you have a person that meets the qualification as a counselor. So we're going to give spiritual guidance, and a lot of people refer to it as spiritual advice. Number 8 is baby dedications or christenings. And number 9, which is a prerequisite for all of the other 8, is the regular conducting of a worship service. Now, here's what's important. As you go through this, you must know what those 9 things are in order for you, the bookkeeper, or what we refer to as a check writer, to issue a tax-free housing allowance that doesn't go into the person's W-2 form. What you have to think about is how can you help that ordained, licensed, commissioned minister of the gospel in receiving tax-free benefits. Now, we all want to pay the least amount of tax that we can, but we want to make sure that we're complying with the law of the land, don't we? So that's the reason why we need to know as much about this subject as we can, because you need to get your house of worship in order today. So you know what the 9 sacerdotal duties are. Let's take an example. The law says that you must be doing substantially all of these 9 things. Substantially all, a majority thereof, with the prerequisite number 9, the regular conducting of a worship service. It also says that you must be doing all 9 consistently, participatory, and available to perform these 9 sacerdotal duties. Now, as a church check writer or bookkeeper, your job is to make sure that the things that do not need to go into the pastor or the ordained, licensed, commissioned minister's W-2 form doesn't go into that. So what makes it qualified? There's 2 types. You have to realize, are you ordained for God's purposes, or are you ordained for tax purposes? Can you be both? The answer is yes, obviously. But your job is to make sure that we qualify the last part before we qualify the first part. And here's the way you do that. Just because an ordained, licensed, commissioned minister of the gospel has credentials on the wall, framed and matted 3 times the size they should normally be, and some of you know what I'm talking about, does that make that person ordained for tax purposes? The answer to that is no. Is that person ordained for God's purposes? Absolutely. But now that we have him ordained for God's purposes, we must qualify that person as ordained for tax purposes. What's the requirement? He has to be doing all of the 9 sacerdotal duties. Now, can someone other than a man be ordained for tax purposes and for God's purposes? The answer is absolutely yes. So now you have the credential part. You have that. Let's examine it and take an example. If your minister of music is only doing an Easter and Christmas cantata, or maybe just directing the praise and worship team at your church, powerful praise and worship, he's ordained. He has his credentials from some ordained body. Is he ordained for God's purposes? Yes. Is he ordained for tax purposes? No, because leading the choir is not one of the 9 sacerdotal duties. So your job as the church bookkeeper or check writer is to make sure that you know who's doing what and if it qualifies for tax-free benefits. I believe that you want to help as many people in the ministry receive tax-free housing as you can. Here's what you need to do. Make sure as you go through the books and records that you know that they're ordained not only for God's purposes, but they must be ordained for tax purposes. This is Michael Chitwood. Till next time, Breaking Points.
Breaking Points gives you the latest IRS updates and tax law. Pastor, if the IRS came to your church today, what would you say? If you really want your house of worship in order, call 1-800-345-9117.